Hello, everyone, and welcome to this event tonight. On behalf of today's organisers, I'm delighted to welcome you to this online rally entitled Winning a Socialist Future, Ending Austerity, Racism and War. This event is presented by Union Lefts, more of which you'll hear about as we go on in association with Strikemap and Arise, a festival of left ideas, of which I'm proud to be the national coordinator. For those of you who haven't been aware of similar events held during the last two TUC annual congresses, the union lefts that have come together in these important acts of coordination are the RMT Board Left, PCS Left Unity, Time for Real Change in Unison, United Left and Unite the Union, and the NEU Left. It's an honour to chair this event featuring these groups tonight, and it's really great to have had over 1,000 people register in advance and see the numbers logging on here on Zoom, watching on social media, and indeed on Arise's YouTube channel, where you'll be able to watch back any bits you miss later. A little ask before we get down to the business of tonight. Please do donate £20 or what you can afford in the link provided in the chat to the streaming costs. These events, as they've got bigger and more regular ideas, have cost us a lot more to put on than you might think, and all the donations go to help those direct technical costs. Please do also, and I do really urge you to do this, be sure to tell us where you are tuning in from in the chat, what trade unions you're a member of, if you are a member of trade union or other campaigns, and what struggles you're involved in locally too. Put these all in the Q&A section on Zoom, and I'll give as many shout outs as I can. Please do keep chatting with us throughout and let us know where you're tuning in from. The context of this event today is as we start 2025 and we look around at the climate crises, the wars in Gaza and elsewhere, and the economic situation here and globally, it's still the case, as many great socialists have said before, that the choice is socialism or barbarism. In terms of the global economic order, the world's 5 richest men have more than doubled their fortune since 2020, while the wealth of the poorest 60% has fallen. If these trends continue, the world will have its first trillionaire within this decade, but poverty won't be eradicated for another 229 years. And the situation here in Britain is also, I would argue, to put it plainly, barbaric. In 2022/23, 21% of the population here, or 14.3 million people, are in poverty, including 4.3 million children. And yet Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves not only refuse to scrap the cruel 2-child benefit cap, but proposing even more benefit cuts while still committing to wasting billions more on new nukes. We are here today to not only say we won't stand for it, but also to organise and come together not only against more austerity, racism and war, but also for the alternative, a socialist future where public need comes before corporate greed. And on that note, I'll move on to our speakers. Our first speaker today is a great person a lot of you would have seen campaigning and speaking. I saw him recently on the important Stand Up to Racism demonstration against Tommy Robinson. It's the chair of the PCS, president, of the PCS, Martin Cavanagh. Over to you, Martin. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matt. And can I also thank the organisers for inviting myself on behalf of PCS Left Unity and as PCS president to address tonight's event. What I think is a critical, and what we believe as a union is a critical period for our movement, but also for our society, a wider society, and for all of the reasons that you've outlined in your opening remarks, Matt, the horrendous figures that we could probably spend the next 2 hours reeling off one after another about the real plight of which we are the working class in this country and across the world find themselves in right now. In my contribution tonight, I am going to focus very much on where we are in the UK right now, and in particular, I want to touch on some of the challenges that our members in PCS are facing, because it won't have gone unnoticed if you've been keeping an eye on what's going on in the media, with either leaks to the media or commentators giving their view about what is likely to come from an economic perspective in the weeks and months ahead. And we clearly, as a union, are waiting, I think, with a degree of trepidation for the outcome of the comprehensive spending review, as the government call it. With this year, we know, if all the rumours are to be believed, is going to have an absolutely massive impact on our members' pay, on our members' jobs, but actually just as critically on the services that our members provide. Because in PCS, of course, we are the civil servants who administer the benefit system, who collect the taxes, who patrol our borders, who work, in passport offices, and, provide absolutely vital services from the cradle through to the grave. But more and more, what we've seen now is over the past number of years and decade or so in particular, our members more and more are having to both work one side of the counter while visit the other side of the counter to try and get some of the benefits that they administer. And certainly, while we're waiting for the outcome of the CSR, the Comprehensive Spending Review, we believe that there is a really worrying time for the entire public sector, because if all of the talk about efficiencies and savings is to believe, we all know what that means traditionally and historically. It doesn't mean improvement or reform in the truest sense of the word. It means cut after cut, whether it be services, whether it be jobs, whether it be workplaces, etc. But our members in PCS, and I do just want to touch on this very briefly, of course, are primarily known in the wider society as administering the welfare system and the benefit system. But perhaps what isn't always as well known is that now we literally have tens of thousands of our members who are also claiming the very same benefits that they administer, in particular claiming universal credit and other disability benefits that are on offer. And they do that because their salaries are so low after over 20 years of pay stagnation and pay suppression. But we as a union have never just focused on the T's and C's and the pay. We have also always looked outwards as well. And so we are proud of the work that we do with campaigning organisations such as the organisers tonight, but also Disabled People Against the Cuts, about trying to alter the narrative and change the narrative about what actually the benefit system should be and how we can make things better and have a better and fairer social security system for all. And while we're on the subject, and you've already touched on it, I mean, let's be quite clear. One of the first things that the new government should be doing is reinstating the whip for all of those MPs who are brave enough to vote against and campaign against the two-child limit, the Tory two-child limit, which, let's be clear about this, absolutely places children into poverty, absolutely places them into poverty, and that should be scrapped with immediate effect, alongside the household benefit cap, the bedroom tax, and the punitive sanctions regime, which is a blight on our society and a blight on our civilization or progress for civilization. I mentioned earlier on about the ministers and what they're now coming out with and sort of traipsing before ahead of the comprehensive spending review. And a lot of it is around efficiencies. But of course, what we know they mean by that is very different. They don't mean efficiencies. When they talk about efficiency savings, we certainly know they don't mean the inefficiency of people hoarding billions of pounds while others have nothing. We know that they don't mean the inefficiency of some people who have dozens of homes while others have none. We absolutely know what they mean by that, and that is cutting jobs and cutting services that are provided to the working class people. And so our job as a movement, as a union, yes, but our job as part of that wider movement has to be not only to challenge that wherever we see those cuts or wherever those threats appear, but we also have to be clear that we should be the ones driving the alternative narrative to those cuts and to that austerity agenda. Because if the Bank of England forecast of inflation rising to 3.7% against a likely pay rise of around about 2.8%, we know that is a real terms pay cut. But what we also know is that that is not in isolation. That is after decades, literally decades of pay suppression for our members and other public sector workers. And what it will mean, without any doubt, is further poverty pay and more people claiming the national living wage or having to get a national living wage uplift in our union alone. Just in the two largest departments, in the Department for Work and Pensions and Revenue and Customs, nearly 25,000 staff will get the national living wage uplift come April because their wages are so low. But in addition to that, of course, it's not just about the money and the pay element of it. There's also the key promises that the Tories, the Labour government made. Sorry, Freudian slip there. Made in head lead up to the general election specifically on the employment rights bill. Because if the government allow the lobbyists and big business to continue to water down that bill, then rather than be a governance at a time of the greatest change in workers' rights and improvements in workers' rights for generations, what they will do instead is they will blow that, and they will absolutely be accused of lying to the electorate, and they will be accused of misleading the electorate. And there are things that are good in that employment rights bill. So we know workers' rights from day one. We know strengthening sick pay, banning firing, rehire and 0 hours contracts, and repealing the anti-trade union laws. Key pledges that if they renege on will go down, I think, in history as an absolute sellout. And now is not the time for Labour to be embarking on that. We have members currently on strike right now amongst our membership, working on outsourced contracts. So those that used to work in the civil service. Primarily, these are people who are cleaners, or caterers, and are security guards in government departments. A lot of activity around Whitehall. Some of you may have been along to the picket lines to give solidarity and support to those workers. Mostly earning minimum wage or a fraction above it, and absolutely with some of the worst terms and conditions you could ever wish to see. Now, this government promised that they would oversee the biggest wave of insourcing in a generation. Well, I can tell you right now, as it currently stands, the number of contracts that are being taken back in-house, it's none, zero, and no plans to do so at this stage, as far as we can see. So these are the workers that keep ministers safe, the workers who clean their offices, the workers who provide working canteens, serving them lunches, and yet they don't get the bare minimum when it comes to respect and dignity in the workplace, either in pay, sick pay, or terms and conditions. So again, we call on the new government, Labour government, to deliver what it promised. The trade union movements and those in the Labour Party need to say firmly to the Labour leadership, very, very loud and clear, that if you do not boost the people's living standards, if you do not invest in public services, you will be handing the next general election to another party, very possibly Reform. And you cannot and should not engage in imitating the language and the narrative that Reform, because that is not the way forward. Absolutely, we are clear that people want solutions and hope. They do not want scapegoats. They do not want people being othered and victimised and oppressed. So when you copy the language of Reform and the Tories, attacking refugees, demonising migrants, then you will be opposed as strongly by our union every bit as much as the previous government was. Remember that we were the union alongside Care for Calais that took the last government to court, and we stopped them in the tracks with the obscene Rwanda policy. We won. And our message to the Labour government is very, very simple. Stop blaming disabled people. Stop demonising migrants. Boost people's wages. Build a good economy. Build good social housing and council housing, and fund public services. Give people that hope, and you can have a legacy that you may well be proud of. You renege on those promises that you gave, and you can expect a backlash from the Labour and trade union movements in the months ahead. So solidarity, comrades. Have a good rest of the evening, and I can't wait to hear the rest of the speakers. Cheers, Matt.
Thanks, Martin, and also thanks to Fran, your General Secretary, and everyone at the PCS. Solidarity as well of your members taking action too. Really powerful contribution in bringing up a lot of issues we need to be thinking about what's actually going on at the moment. We're now moving over to a short video that's been sent in by someone who can't be with us today, but is one of the co-organisers today was Strikemap, and we've now got a short video from Gawain Little of Strikemap.
Gawain Little, Strikemap. I'm really sorry that I can't join you this evening for this crucial discussion on winning a socialist future. It takes place at a challenging time for our movement and for our entire society, both in Britain and internationally. Here in Britain, we've seen over the past 45 years the unchallenged dominance of neoliberal economics and politics, leading to the deindustrialisation of our economy, leaving whole swathes of the country prone to high unemployment, insecure work, low wages. We've seen the destruction of communities as the social fabric of our society has been torn apart, the privatisation of our public services, and a massive shift of wealth from working people to the very richest in our society. All of that has been accompanied by a political and legal framework which has consistently attacked trade unions, the right to organise, and the right of working people to come together in their communities to defend themselves. Off the back of that, we face one of the most severe crises we ever have in our history. And we can see this around us, both internationally with war, destruction, the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people. And we see it domestically with the rise of the far right, people providing false answers to those people who are left searching for some alternative to a political system, a mainstream political system that has fundamentally abandoned them. Challenging this will involve restructuring our entire economy. It will involve making working people wealthier. It will involve putting money in people's pockets. It will involve challenging the low pay culture. It will involve implementing secure employment rights. It will involve rebuilding our public services and rebuilding the fabric of our communities. That kind of investment can only come through an alternative economic policy, not through tinkering at the edges. But in order to secure such a policy from a Labour government, which already is facing severe attacks from big capital for the most modest of measures, in order to change policies of austerity and challenge the cost of living crisis, we need a movement that is strong enough to fight back, to push back against those in power. Now, building such a movement is absolutely a challenge for us, given the political framework, the legal framework, and the challenges of the last 45 years. But the reality is that that building must take place now. We must link together the fights of working people to defend their wages, their terms and conditions, to rebuild their communities, with those wider fights against war, against imperialism, against neo-colonialism. We must link those things together, because the reality is they come from the same source and they affect working people right across the world. So we need to link together our fights, but we also need to build a movement that has the power to take those on. Now, crucial to that, as we've seen over the current struggle over the Employment Rights Bill, crucial to that is putting right at the centre the fight for sectoral collective bargaining, so that we can force up wages through direct bargaining with employers across entire sectors and bring back that strength of the labour movement. But, as has often been said, collective bargaining means nothing unless those agreements can be enforced on the ground. So we must combine the struggle for sectoral collective bargaining with the building of strong militant workplace organisation. Without being organised in every workplace, in every community across this country, we won't have the power necessary to shift the conditions we find ourselves in. So my plea tonight would be, if we want to change society, if we want to challenge the rise of the far right, that we go back into our workplaces, into our communities, and we build the kind of power we need to enforce the answers that working people are crying out for, to enforce decent employment rights, to enforce decent pay, to rebuild our public services and our society. Together we go forward and we build solidarity.
Thank you, Gawain, for sending in that video, and thank you to Strikemap. You can read more about Strikemap, including an important event the Campaign for Trade Union Freedom and others have coming up in March about the Employment Rights Bill in the chat. Thanks to everyone who's telling us where you're from in the Q&A. It's great to see hundreds more of you joining us all the time. And if you are watching us on Facebook as well, please give the feed a share. Greetings to people tuning in selection of places: Peckham, Manchester, Northampton, Duggold, Wiltshire, Durham, Derby, Bristol, Blackpool, Stockport, Northumberland, Sheffield, Hove, Birmingham and Ealing. And also particular hello to our international friends joining us, including someone from Almeria in Spain and someone in the belly of the beast in the US from Maryland. Thanks for joining us. And before we go on to our next main speaker, we have a quick message from the RISE volunteer, Ben Foley.
Thanks for that, Matt. Can you hear me okay? Cool. Well, I'm Ben. I'm a volunteer with Arise. Just want to thank everyone for joining tonight, as Matt's already done. But events like tonight continue to bring together the broad left. So people from the trade unions, those in the Labour Party, those who are outside it in the wider left, and our social movements. And these events are vital to keep doing that. But as with the in-person events we're keen to do more of, these online events continue to have lots of costs, and we do need your donation if you can. So it's covering things like streaming platforms, distribution lists, other advertising costs to make people aware, build our audience. They all have costs, so it's all involved in putting the event on. We don't have any costs for our volunteers. We are doing it in our spare time. So please donate if you can, and the link should be in the chat page there. And if you can, that'd be really appreciated. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you. I can see a couple of people already donating on that link. Please do click through and do that before or afterwards if you can't. And thanks to everyone who does donate to Arise. And please do keep joining us online and in person, and also get in touch with your ideas about how we can have more events coming forward. Our next speaker is someone who, in a domestic and global situation, it's very important to hear from tonight, and it's very important all the work she does, and she's familiar to all of you, I'm sure. Someone I'm privileged to call a friend and comrade, I think, for over 20 years now, which is perhaps showing my age to people. It's the co-convener of Stand Up to Racism, Sabby Dhalu.
Thank you very much, Matt, and thank you to Arise for inviting me to this very important meeting. So now is an important time to remember how important standing up to racism is. It's not an optional extra. It's critical to building a free, fair and equal society. And it is of critical importance at this precise moment in time. Reform UK topped 2 opinion polls last week, and it's very important that Labour reverses this trend. But it won't reverse this trend by producing videos and adverts with Reform UK branding, boasting about how many people it's deported. And it won't reverse this trend with the Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill. This is rolling out the red carpet at number 10 for Nigel Farage, and it's vital that Labour reverses this agenda. Labour cannot out-racist the racists. Labour must learn lessons from the US. Biden's presidency, his failure to make people better off, his concessions to Trump's agenda on immigration led to Trump back in the White House. The only way to stop the rise of reform is to challenge, not concede to its agenda. And that means when racists and fascists run riots and attack mosques, hotels, housing refugees, that we call out the racism and Islamophobia. And that means implementing safe passage and a human rights-based approach to asylum. That means accepting immigrants build Britain and that they make us better off. And it also means celebrating our multicultural and diverse society. And finally, it means making people better off. Racism thrives when people feel worse off financially. And so to stop a pro-Trump government in number 10 and to stop Tommy Robinson supporters marching up and down the streets, hailing that as a big victory, it's very important that Labour stands for better living standards for the many, and that it stands for challenging, not conceding to racism and celebrating our multicultural and diverse society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sabby, and thank you to Stand Up to Racism for everything you do. I hope people on here join the Stand Up to Racism march every year, and also on the recent mobilisation against Tommy Robinson. It really does matter that we don't give an inch to racism, and also that means not giving an inch to reform. I think a lot of people on this call would have been quite shocked by the online and other advertising we saw from the Labour Party on the weekend, which isn't so much not giving an inch, it's just running completely after reform's far-right agenda, and we see how dangerous that agenda is with Trump. Also, I think Sabby makes a really important point that we also need to be for something. We need to be not just for hope, but we need to be for better living standards for people, for celebrating multicultures and for welcoming refugees and migrants here and what they can do. And also a shout out to the PCS again for the work they've done on the Care for Calais and other campaigns over the years. So important for standing up to racism. Our next speaker is someone who's a very prominent anti-racist activist and also a very prominent campaigner in solidarity with the Palestinian people, the great cause internationally of our time, and of course the focus of our most sustained militant and mass movement over the last 15 months and more. She'll be known to a lot of you already. She's speaking today on behalf of the National Education Union Left, and I'm delighted to now introduce Louise Regan. Over to you, Louise. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much. And thank you to all the other speakers. Very important contributions so far. And we know that we are in a very difficult situation in this country. And Many people were very excited when a Labour government got elected. I wasn't quite so excited because I didn't have any view, or I didn't believe that they were going to deliver anything, and that is quite clear in terms of what we are seeing and what we've already heard from other comrades. It's not a Labour government that we would have wanted that is now in office. As has been said, I'm speaking from the National Education Union Left group, and obviously our union has sort of been at the forefront of pushing back on education cuts, particularly over the past sort of decade. We took a number of days of sustained strike action back in 23-24 and won significant pay awards for our members to try and redress the balance for them in terms of the pay that they had lost. But we were very clear when we ended that action that our expectation of an incoming government was that they took forward that position, and that they thought carefully about any future pay awards for our members in terms of redressing the losses that they'd had over a decade, but also that they looked really carefully at school funding, which is a massive issue. I was on a school cuts meeting, Zoom meeting last night, where we heard from people within the union, but also two head teachers who talked about the devastating position within their schools. And we all know that our schools are falling apart, not only in terms of what they're able to deliver in terms of staffing, but also physically falling apart. It is the case for many of them, where there is not enough money to keep them in good order in terms of the building's structure. So this government, the Labour government, announced that they were going to give school staff a 2% or teachers a 2.8% unfunded pay award in September. We were outraged by that. It does nothing to address the situation in terms of recruitment and retention of staff into our schools. And also, by next year, we know that school costs will rise by 3.4%. So schools will already need an additional £700 million just to cover those additional costs. 76% of primary schools and 94% of secondary schools will not be able to cover those costs. We know that already from the information that we have. But if the government doesn't think again, there is going to be a major crisis in our schools because there just isn't the funds there to support that. There are more schools in deficit now than at any point since at least 2010. And just 3% of primary schools and 6% of secondaries say they are financially secure. That's a shocking position when we live in a country which has such a large amount of wealth. We have the highest primary class sizes in Europe and the highest secondary class sizes on record. So this is the position that our educators are facing on a daily basis. And we know that more than 1 million children are currently being taught in classes of over 30. There is no way that schools can fund this pay rise and the additional cost next year by making efficiencies. There are no efficiencies to be made in our schools. Our schools have already cut to the bone in terms of what they are doing. So we are completely clear that this is unacceptable. And that is why, as a union, we have already started a move towards an indicative ballot over the next few weeks and leading up to our annual conference. And we will be looking to take national action over this with our members. I think there are a couple of other things that I wanted to cover. Obviously, funding is a real key issue for us, and we're aware that this government, rather than focusing on the funding of our schools, has focused on making more cuts. It's quite interesting to know that Keir Starmer would be the first Labour Prime Minister since James Callaghan to tell schools to make cuts. They call this making efficiencies, as I've said, but there are no efficiencies to be made. The other thing I just wanted to cover briefly, there's just been an Ofsted review. So people on the call may be aware that a head teacher called Ruth Perry killed herself in January 2023 following an Ofsted inspection. It was horrendous. Ofsted opened up a big listen, which was apparently to listen to the people in the profession, to think about what they were doing, to think about changes that they could make. They have just announced the results of that. They're moving from a one-word judgment to a 1 to 5 grading scale, which is proposed for something called a report card. It's absolutely horrendous. It does not do anything to address the concerns that the profession have raised. It is not going to help our schools at all. It has been, the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, has said that it's a great thing. It's going to make all the difference. We know as educators, this is not the answer to what is happening in our schools. But the difficulty at the moment is Ofsted, the government do not listen to educators and are not interested in our views about what is happening. The Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, made a speech on the 3rd of February. She reinforced that she's fully supportive of the current proposals from Ofsted. She also spent a long time attacking the profession. She talked about Michael Gove's reforms and how wonderful he was, which for anyone in the education profession is really a red rag to a bull. She said Michael Gove called the soft bigotry of low expectations. And she said that is exactly what is happening in our schools. Well, I can tell you now, our members do not have low expectations. They have very high expectations. They have high expectations of the government that should be delivering the adequate funding for our schools to ensure that all children are able to access the things that they need. So what Bridget Phillipson did in her speech, in my view, is she really helped us with our ballot, because I think our members will listen to what she said and what the government is saying and think this is a government that is not listening to education. It's not listening to the people who are doing the job on a daily basis. And it is time that we take action to oppose that and to support the children and young people that we teach. And that is what we will be driving forward as a union. And we would like to work with other people, obviously, to try and do joint work around taking action against the attacks this government is having on our public services. Thank you.
Thanks to Louise, and Frank, such an important update from a National Education Union perspective. As Louise and others have said, we need to keep standing up against more cuts and further austerity measures in education and beyond. And also, as Louise and Martin have mentioned, we need to stand with everyone taking industrial action now and also potential industrial actions coming up. Well done to everyone mobilising for action and suggesting joint action. And also, please do remember that you can keep in touch with all the strikes taking place and how best to show your solidarity on the Strikemap website. It's amazing the job that Henry and the team do with that, keeping it up to date each week and also updating on so many local and regional petitions, campaigns, and other things that unions of all unions are taking action on. Also, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Louise for the work she does with her Palestine hat on as well, for the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. As everyone on this call, I'm sure would agree, it's a complete disgrace that the UK is still arming Israel after all the genocide we've seen over the last 15 months. And we should demand an end to all arms sales to Israel, as the TUC called for last year. And also we should be supporting justice for Palestine beyond just opposing what Israel is doing, and that means supporting the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. It also means hitting the streets for the national demonstrations as they continue, despite police intimidation, including the protest this Saturday. And also, as I've just hinted at, we need to keep defending our right to protest and people's right to protest for Palestine. Before turning to our next speakers, also a quick thanks I can see in the Q&A box. Keep telling us where you're from, but we've got people tuning in from a lot of different unions. I can see people from the NEU, the GMB, Unison, Unite, PCS, ASLEF, TSSA, RMT, and more. And also great to see 3 or 4 people highlighting that they're tuning in with their hat on from different trades councils. Trades councils remain such an important part of our struggle. And when we're talking about coordinating action and the kind of thing Louise and others have been talking about tonight, then do make sure you affiliate to your local trades council and get involved with that. I'm just looking at the numbers on Facebook, YouTube here, and this is one of the biggest online events for ages on the left. The Rise, as people know, is probably the biggest online events platform on the left, and I can see hundreds of people, but also new people joining all the time. So please do tell us where you're tuning in from, but also tell us about your local campaigns, your local struggles, any workplace actions or industrial action you're involved in, and I'll try and give you all some shout outs. This really is a great occasion, and it's great to be working with the Union Lefts and Strikemap. And our next speaker on that note is a young activist who'll be familiar to many of you as a volunteer on Arise, a Festival of Left Ideas events, but speaking today as a member of the Unite's Young Members Committee, Unite Union Young Members Committee, a great friend of everyone on this call and someone who's campaigning coordination of young activists on issues from Palestine to free education to industrial issues, organising for young workers to have proper rights in the employment bill and beyond. It's a great pleasure to now introduce Fraser Maguire. Over to you, Fraser.
Thank you very much, Matt, for that introduction. And I want to start by saying I completely agree. It's fantastic seeing so many people on this call tonight. These sort of conversations, bringing people together from our union lefts, is so necessary, and this is a really timely discussion. Of course, there are some great challenges facing the left and the broader trade union movement, with the intensification of the climate crisis, the advance of the far right abroad, and the strength of reform as a political force at home. It is clear that business as usual is failing. The current government clearly lacks a coherent political programme and is lacking both the ideas and the will to tackle the crisis we're facing. Indeed, it's like there's a dartboard somewhere with policies stuck to it and someone's throwing darts. As a member of Unite's National Young Members Committee and someone that's involved at a regional level in Unite and TUC and worker structures, I just think of many and think and reflect on many conversations that are happening with young workers and in young workers spaces. My regional branch, East Mids Unite Young Members, has recently passed a motion on tackling the rise of the far right. And the conversations that were had in the motion itself focuses often on the fact that the rise of far right rhetoric, social media, on national media and in political discourse, as well as obviously the violence that we saw over the summer and the mobilisations we've seen on our streets, has not occurred in any sort of political vacuum. The decades of economic policy centred around cuts to services, deindustrialisation, privatisation have torn local communities apart, and they've created the ideal conditions for the far right to exploit. Indeed, looking at many young people who seem to be taken in by the lies of Nigel Farage and others, they are correctly identifying that the system is rigged against them, that the system is rigged against the working class, that they've been left behind, they don't have those opportunities, whether that's the threat of the climate crisis looming over their heads, whether that's thinking they'll never be able to get a house, whether that's looking at the devastation of community spaces, which almost don't exist for most people anymore. You've got an entire generation that has essentially grown up in a society with no community spaces or very few community spaces. Or the ones that do exist are privatised, you know, how much you're paying to go to your local football game, not even being able to stand outside the co-op after they get rid of your local youth centre or your skate park. You've got this generation of young people who are correctly feeling disillusioned, but lacking the political articulation to identify that it is because the system is rigged against the working class. Of course, that is why the political as well as the industrial campaigning that we do as union left is so crucial. This vacuum into which the far right grow is also a result of 40 years of repressive legislation targeting trade unions and organisations which champion communities and collective power. The same governments that have created the economic conditions that benefited the far right have also used authoritarian measures to repress the very groups that would be combating the rise of the far right. And when this desperation for political articulation, for a sense of community, is combined with the scapegoating of migrants, racist and Islamophobic vitriol from politicians in the national media, the result is a perfect storm for the growth of the far right. Indeed, as we're seeing with the Labour government currently. The counter to all of this is the rebuilding of our trade union movement, industrially and politically, the willpower to take bold action and build the working class power that we need. A huge part of this industrially is adapting to the shifts that have taken place in the industrial landscape of society. The growth of non-unionised sectors like hospitality, which I'm in, and exploitative employment practices like the gig economy. These businesses they flow like water, they go to the point of least resistance. When you have a sector or an employment model which is really, really difficult to unionise, or that the trade union movement has failed to union organise in, that sector will grow. The spread of the economy we have now is not natural. 3.5 million people more working in hospitality, working in these sort of jobs. That is because partly we have struggled to organise them, and the profit rate is just so high there. It really does link into young workers, especially in the radicalisation of young workers onto the far right. Young workers are 5 times as likely to be on a 0-hours contract, have a far, far higher turnover at work, often typically working less than 2 years at each job. I think I'm on either my 5th or 6th at the moment since I started work at 16. Which means that they miss out on those key employment rights protections, which Labour might, but probably won't be bringing in from day one. And this can be linked to the rise of the far right. These social media influences, Andrew Tate, Luke Belmar, these people, they're telling young people that, yes, you're correct to feel angry, you're correct to feel disillusioned, but it's not because the system's rigged against you and your class, it's because you're a temporarily inconvenienced millionaire. So start an online business and you'll be fine, while at the same time, of course, pushing incredibly reactionary rhetoric. Organising in these sectors with the aim of abolishing the gig economy, with the aim of ending exploitative, low-paid, 0-hours contract work is crucial for our movement, as well as taking on the huge anti-union employers like Amazon, like Starbucks, like Premier Inn. Indeed, Derby, where I'm from, we've got a demonstration on the 1st of March against one of our key branch activists who was sacked for union organising by Premier Inn. It should be incredible to see the local trade union movement mobilise around. And politically, it's so vital that we strengthen our cross-union organisation and coordination, as well as our serious political campaigning. Organisations like Strikemap do incredible work on this. We're building a movement, not just building our own unions. Indeed, the stakes have never been higher, I don't think, at least in my lifetime. On international solidarity, we of course understand that the reason we as trade unionists organise around internationalism and global solidarity is because we understand that things don't happen in a vacuum. What happens abroad matters here. One of the most clear examples of this, of course, being that the neoliberal economics trialled by the brutal Pinochet regime in Chile, of course, came here under Thatcher. The privatisation, but also the authoritarian legislation was trialled abroad, and that's why, international solidarity is so important. It's been so good seeing young workers, as well as even students outside of the trade union movement, mobilising around this great cause of our movement around Palestine, whether that's the university encampments, whether that's motions, whether that's organising in our workplaces. And we build political strength in our union movement precisely because we understand that solidarity does not and cannot be allowed to it's not just in your workplace. It doesn't end when you walk out the door and clock out. The struggle against the billionaire class is permeated through every aspect of society. And it's through building political education that we can allow people to articulate that and understand precisely why they feel the disillusionment they do as society rigged against them. Indeed, the union movement, alongside solidarity groups, community organisations, is the bedrock for the alternative to both business as usual and the false narratives and alternatives offered by demagogues on the far right. And it's that alternative that we so desperately need. We cannot allow the far right to move into the vacuum, being opened up by failure by successive centrist, unambitious governments to respond to the crises that we face. We must organise and build worker power in our workplaces, but also in our communities, on the streets, and of course in our unions, and fight for a genuinely transformative alternative and a socialist future. Thanks very much.
Thanks to Fraser, and sorry, I forgot to turn my video and mic back on now. We're only 5 years into all these events and I'm still forgetting to unmute myself. Some vital points there from Fraser about the need to build power in our workplaces, in our communities. But also I thought at the end there, and an important point from Fraser, we shouldn't just lower our horizons, like we should be for something better. We should still say that we're for a socialist future. We are for a future where public need comes before corporate greed, where people and planet come before private profit, the polluters and the billionaires. A quick reminder again that if you haven't donated to the cost of tonight's event, please do check out that link and donate to this and other events like it. Please do give what you can afford. And a thanks to over 20 of you who have donated during the event and over 300 of you who donated in the run up to it. It really does make a difference and it's much appreciated. Also, still, if you're tuning in now, please do let us know where you're tuning in from in the Q&A box. I see we've been joined by a guest from Indonesia now, who's a common attendee on these Arise calls, and it was great to see them. And also what union you're from, and let us know about your local campaigns. Also, I've been asked before our next speaker to give a few quick reminders of different things. This Saturday, there's a Palestine national demonstration. Please be there in London. Also in March, the annual Stamps Racism UN Anti-Racism Day coming up. And also in March, this event with Mick Lynch in person at the National Education Union headquarters on why we need to repeal anti-union laws and improve workers' rights, with Strikemap in particular, and the Campaign for Trade Union Freedom. Are very keen that you go along to and give a share. Also, before I move on to our last two speakers, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Arise volunteers who are on today's call, and also the growing group of Arise volunteers who are helping in person, online, and other events. They do work really hard. You don't always get to see them, other than when they come on to us for your money or your follows. But without the volunteers, it wouldn't happen. And increasingly, we can all realise just how many more volunteers and people we need. Also, links that I would give, and I see there's quite good numbers on there today, but a quick plug to watch old Arise events back on the YouTube channel. These go back over since the first event we had during the lockdown in 2020, and they include topics as diverse as solidarity of Palestine and Latin America's left, to in-depth discussions like the Engels lecture each year, and also Q&As and in conversation events on things like economic alternatives with the likes of Grace Blakely, John McDonnell, others. So please do take a look at the Arise YouTube channel. Next, we have our speaker from the RMT board left, familiar no doubt to many of you. That speaker is Alex Gordon. Alex, I think it'd be fair to say, is an essential figure in the coordination of the union lefts that we're seeing in tonight's event and the meetings I mentioned at the TC, and also someone who speaks out from a trade union perspective on so many important campaigns and movements, both here and abroad, from the Stop the War Coalition to the Campaign for Trade Union Freedom to regularly writing in the Morning Star and so many other issues. So it's really great now to have time for your perspective, Alex, and thanks for all you do helping tonight's event and with the union left. So over now to Alex Gordon from the RMT board left. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Matt. Can you hear me okay? I think I've unmuted all right.
Good.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone. It's great to see so many people at this online meeting. February's a short month and a cold month and a dark month, and we need to pull together our resistance now, because we're facing a real crisis. And as the title of this meeting says, if we're going to win a socialist future, then we know what we need to combat. We need to end austerity, racism, and war. And I want to talk about all three of those topics. But the first thing I want to just say is that socialists and trade unionists need to work together to build a new fight back. And I'm very pleased that the RMT Broad Left has been able to work with comrades in the PCS Left Unity, NEU Left, United Left, and Unison, and others to join up in the fights in recent years and to continue to develop the demands of our trade union movement. And RMT members working for Avanti West Coast, the train company that operates from London, Euston to Liverpool, Manchester, Glasgow, and Birmingham, are currently in a long-running strike. And we want to thank all the trade unionists from across the movement and across this country for their solidarity and support for our members in their disputes. And Britain is in a new phase of a profound economic, social and political crisis, which has been exposed by the failure of this current government to come up with a credible plan for its ambition to grow the economy. The symptoms of this crisis can be felt all around us, but some of the most obvious and important symptoms are the persistently weak performance of the British economy. So growth rates remain low. They were 0.1% in November 2024, after falling by 0.1% the previous month in October. And the December 2024 growth rate, due to be unveiled this month, is likely to be negative. Overall, the UK economy has flatlined since January 2022, coming out of COVID, fluctuating between low growth and small contractions. And UK business investment is the lowest of all the G7 advanced economies. And UK labour productivity has been in sharp historic decline since the 2008 financial crisis. In 2023, UK labour productivity was 18% below that of the United States, 15% below that of Germany, and 13% below France. Britain's labour market is characterised by low-paying service sector jobs, and the UK economy is geared to the needs of the financial sector and a handful of arms, pharmaceutical and mining companies with no interest in the welfare of British people, while the growth of risky shadow banking and private equity makes UK firms particularly vulnerable to financial crashes. There is a terrifying drive to war taking place, and the British state is up to its neck in promoting the growing global violence, which pushed us to the brink of nuclear catastrophe last November, when British supplied and controlled cruise missiles were used to bomb Russia. Britain arms and supports Israel's genocide in Gaza and its endless war on its neighbours through military hardware exports and use of the Akrotiri RAF base in Cyprus. Britain scuppered peace talks in Ukraine and urged a hard line on the Ukrainian government, bankrolling it and arming it, quote, for as long as it takes, unquote, while pensioners at home go cold and hungry, engaging in an almost inexplicable brinkmanship that is taking us to the edge of Armageddon, all in the interests of oil and gas companies looking to carve up global reserves and greedy investors who want to privatise the assets in the name of reconstruction. And Britain's military-industrial complex has been a cheerleader for military aggression against China, promoted through the AUKUS Pact to finance and build nuclear submarines based in Australia for deployment in the Indo-Pacific region. We are seeing falling working-class living standards in Britain. According to the TUC, British workers are suffering the worst decline in living standards of any G7 country. Real household disposable incomes are lower than before the 2020 pandemic, as Britain's particularly exposure to the forces driving the cost of living crisis are compounded by the effects of the long-term sluggish growth that I mentioned earlier. And we've seen sharply widened inequality. We've got more billionaires in Britain than ever, controlling more than £653 billion worth of wealth. The top 10% of the population of Britain control 57% of all the wealth, and the bottom 50% of the population control just 4.6%. We're seeing a destruction of small businesses. The number of small businesses has shrunk in Britain from almost 6 million in 2020 to 5.5 million in 2022, and reports show widespread fear of closure amongst small businesses, while high streets are dying and being populated by wealthy chains with private equity backers, or being abandoned completely for business parks or online retail. And we're seeing a growing social conflict dividing Britain. Some of this, such as the 2022-2023 strike wave, indicates a resurgence of class politics. But the riots in English towns and cities that began 3 weeks after the 2024 general election show social alienation, divided communities being manipulated by racist and far-right forces. And the rise of Reform UK shows a new level of organisation and ambition on the far right, which is leading us into an era of fascist advance. Keir Starmer's Labour government perfectly expresses this crisis. Labour won the July 2024 general election on a massive protest vote against failed Tory policies, but with very little popular enthusiasm for Labour's programme. In 2024, Labour lost 500,000 votes from its total vote share in the 2019 general election. So it proved itself less electorally popular than under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. The Starmer government's subsequent polling has been disastrous. Labour's budget and legislative agenda set out to appease City of London financial interests, austerity fixation, and accelerate spending on war, while claiming to scrap austerity for working people, facing low wage growth, collapsing business confidence, a tax on benefits, and cuts to domestic public spending across government departments. Labour's few progressive manifesto commitments, such as an employment rights bill and rail renationalisation, now bear the heavy imprint of corporate lobbying to dilute its legislative programme. A Labour government could address the symptoms of Britain's crisis, which are economic stagnation, low wages, low productivity, high social inequality, decrepit infrastructure, but it won't. Labour's affiliated unions, which traditionally sought to push Labour governments in the right direction, seem unable to resist the organised pressure of big business in Britain. And Labour will continue to fail, lose popularity, and could lose the next general election to the far right. What do we do? Well, the trade unions and socialists need to campaign, firstly, to rebuild living standards. Keir Starmer asked to be judged on whether people's living standards had gone up after 5 years in government. The working class can't wait 5 years for a Labour government committed to fiscal responsibility and with no plan to create economic growth to pull this off. The far right is preparing to take advantage of Labour's failure to deliver at the next election. Raising living standards now is the priority for organised workers. Unions must build coordinated campaigns to win pay rises in the public and private sectors, a fight back against employer offensives, and a militant response to austerity in the public sector can force businesses and the government to increase spending and investment through collective action. Unions should coordinate our actions wherever possible, although we shouldn't fetishise calls for a general strike. We need to, I think, be realistic about how we can bring together the struggles that our members are involved in. In 2020, unions adopted a CWU proposal, Communication Workers Union proposal, for a unified bargaining agenda as TUC policy. Of course, continued failure to implement this agenda is a significant retreat. We need to get coordinated and unified bargaining in reality through coordination between our unions. And there is significant resistance to this agenda in some unions. Some union leaderships see industrial action, particularly in the public sector, as a threat to the Labour government and may seek to avoid industrial confrontations. Others will only see narrow sectional interests instead of the wider class outlook. But the left, that's us, cannot be blind to the power of these arguments. Unions can't be indifferent to the fate of the Labour government, but neither must they be cowed by the need to defend it. Unless a militant, organised working class wins real advances for workers, Labour will lose the next election. Left to its own devices, it will hand power to a resurgent right wing. The left in the unions must force union leaders to look outward and to work together, which is not a habit that they're used to. Recognising that different groups of workers will bargain on different timetables and organise members with different levels of consciousness and militancy. But the truth is that each union alone can only win partial and temporary improvements for members. To win irreversible changes and take on the organised power of big business means building unity between unions around a common industrial agenda. I'm not sure if I've gone on too long for you, Matt. Please tell me if I should shut up at this point.
It's impossible, Alex, for you to go on too long for me. Although I do see that our final speaker is joining us. So have you got any final sum ups before I do my sum up?
No, I think I'm handing over to you at this point, Matt.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Alex. So many important points and issues raised there, including how we reassert class politics and our socialist case for a different future, and in particular what that concretely means in terms of improving living standards, meaning an end to austerity for good, expanding public ownership and control, taxing the rich, and calling generally for investment, not cuts. Also, I thought what was really important from Alex's speech was that we must never forget, in particular, that the struggle for peace is part of our struggle for socialism. That must be against nuclear weapons and renewing Trident. Our message then is clear: welfare, not warfare, books, not bombs, nurses, not nukes. And as we've mentioned already, it means ending all arms sales to Israel and calling for justice for Palestine. Before we go on to our final speaker, please do also take a look at the comments and the responses in the Q&A sections. There's hundreds in there, and it's great to see people announcing local campaigns and events. To give just one example, an anti-racist event at Waltham Forest Baptist Church tomorrow, but also details now available in the chat and there about the action Fraser mentioned in his contribution about saying no to union busting at Premier Inn. We now move on to our final speaker tonight. As someone doesn't need much introduction, of course, but I'll give him one anyway. It's the independent MP for Islington North, and also the MP for so many of us who speaks up for those causes we are standing in unity for today, for peace, justice, solidarity, and socialism. Over now to our final speaker, my dear friend and comrade for so many years. Over to you, Jeremy Corbyn. Thanks so much for joining us. I know you're busy tonight. Thank you, Jeremy.
Matt, thank you very much. The wonders of Zoom means that we can do several meetings in one evening, which is possibly a good thing. I just want to talk on a short message on some global issues. 47,000 people have now died in Gaza that we know about, and thousands and thousands of more bodies are going to be uncovered as the rubble is cleared away. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants. The International Court of Justice has said in terms it's tantamount to genocide what's happened with the Israeli bombardment. Britain has supplied weapons. RAF Akrotiri has been a staging point for doing this, and the ceasefire arrangements are in peril at this very moment. And the US president is saying all hell will break loose unless all the hostages are released by the weekend, and then announcing that the ceasefire will be suspended. The ceasefire is an agreement between both sides. Both sides have to respect it, and that has to be the only possible way forward. And so we have this horrendous danger of what may happen in Gaza in 3 days' time if the bombardment recommences and the Israeli army moves back into Gaza with goodness knows what level of casualties. And we've all been seeing the pictures of the total devastation of the place. And the Israeli Defense Force has now moved big time into the West Bank, and for the first time, as long as I can remember, started aerial bombardment of specific targets on the West Bank, and the settlements have grown and the settler violence has increased even more. And so you ask yourself the question, why is it that our government seems to be so incapable of saying or doing anything positive which could actually help to bring about a ceasefire, anything positive that will help to stop the endless supply of highly sophisticated weapons to Israel, which have been used to bombard the people of Gaza, the Palestinian people. And so the only thing we can do is raise our voices, give our messages of solidarity, and attend the demonstration. So this Saturday's demonstration, assembling at 12 o'clock in Whitehall and marching along the embankment, Vauxhall Bridge, down to the US Embassy, where a rally will take place. We've been on every one of these demonstrations. This will be the 25th demonstration. I've been on all of them. And I'll be on all of them as long as it takes, because I feel so strongly and so angry at the way the Palestinian people have been so historically wronged. The only thing they can rely on is a modicum of international solidarity. 2 weeks ago, I was in The Hague, helping to establish the Hague Convention, which was set up through Progressive International. And I was there on behalf of the Peace and Justice Project, which is closely associated with Progressive International. And the Hague Declaration is a declaration by 9 member states of the UN that they will work together unreservedly to support Palestine and support the decisions of the International Criminal Court and the ICJ. It was a very powerful presentation that was made, particularly the presentations by South Africa, Cuba and other countries. 9 countries were involved in it. And the Malaysian initiative in helping to, well, not initiative, the Malaysian support for it was very important in getting a wider range of countries to be involved. So we're working on all of that to sort of build this global international movement to try to ensure that Palestine is recognized and Palestinian people are supported. But it's not going to happen unless we understand the history of it, understand the way the Palestinian people have been treated, and understand the unbelievable levels of abuse that are thrown at anyone who supports Palestine. Our marches have been called marches of hate. Our marches have been called divisive, and the last one was limited essentially to a rally in Whitehall. That is a matter that's still being debated and discussed. But I'm very happy and very confident this weekend's demonstration will go ahead as we intend it to do so. Then you ask yourself the question as to why is this the case? Because our marches are completely united. There's a very large Jewish bloc there. There's very large numbers of people there who are Muslim people and people from all faiths and none. But there seems to me to be sometimes a shortage of much trade union involvement. Some unions have been very, very good in being involved. The PCS, UCW have been involved, the Bakers Union have been involved, the RMT have been involved, NASLEF have been involved, but other unions seem to have been quite reluctant to get involved. Unison, GMB, and Unite need to be there at a national and official level as well. And so I think we need to be pushing more and more on this and more on the suspension of the arms trade. Likewise, on the other conflicts going on around the world, the dreadful war in Ukraine, Russia-Ukraine, there are some moves that there may be peace talks going on. They may be happening already for all I know, but there has to be a political and diplomatic settlement. We cannot go on just being observers in almost a First World War style of conflict as conscripted soldiers on both sides die in the mud in the winter in the Ukraine and indeed now in parts of Russia. I hope that means there is some peace process going on. But this is a failure of the European Union, the failure of the UN in order to even get the peace talks going. And so you have to say well done to the Pope and well done to Latin American leaders and in particular African Union leaders that have tried to bring about those peace talks to bring about a ceasefire. And the other conflicts going on in the world, Sudan is one of the most vicious conflicts at the moment, weapons being poured in there through the UAE from British and American suppliers, which have prolonged that conflict. There are signs there may well be some sort of peace process going on, but it's the numbers of people that have already lost their lives and the thirst for the raw materials and the value of Sudan is there by the protagonists in it. And the other great war that's going on is in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where Rwanda has been funding the guerrilla movement, or militia movement rather, which has taken over part of Eastern Congo, the area that is mineral rich in every respect. And so you have to look at what is the source of these wars, what is the source of these conflicts, and how we can influence it. Our government, unfortunately, seems incapable of looking at the issues of peace and of the arms trade, and all they can see is increasing arms expenditure to 2.5% of GDP to keep up with the endless NATO demand, and that will be £30 billion a year more on the defence expenditure. And after that, no doubt they'd want to put it up some more. We've been involved through Peace and Justice Project in the promotion of this book here, The Monstrous Anger of the Guns. The Monstrous Anger of the Guns comes from the Wilfred Owen poem of the First World War, in which he said, "What passing bells for those that die like cattle, only the monstrous anger of the guns." And we've been having rallies and meetings all over the country on this book, and we're inundated with requests to do more of them. I was at the Marx Memorial Library on Sunday with Alex and others, and Alex will attest to the very interesting and very good conversation we had about the power of the arms trade and what the alternatives to it are. And so I think we have to be promoting an alternative defence policy, because a defence review is going on at the moment, and try and look to what could be a peace dividend. Because if we're going to, as a country, spend this amount more on weapons, then what chance is there of ending the scandal of the two-child benefit cap? What possibility is there of compensating the WASPy women for the way that they've been so badly treated by successive governments? What possibility is there of doing something different to that which Liz Kendall is proposing, and instead of cutting benefits and blaming claimants, start looking at the needs of the poorest people in this country and the opportunities for people to train, develop their lives, and all that goes with it. So we seem to be moving into a very militaristic period, occasioned partly by Donald Trump, but also by NATO, which are not necessarily the same thing at all times. And so I hope that we can develop this interesting conversation. We can put an alternative up to the defence review that's being done at the present time, and we can start to look at alternatives to spending and investing all this money on arms, and instead look to the peaceful opportunities that should be available. This is, of course, rather contrary to the general trajectory of both the media and political opinion in the major parties at the present time. But that's not a reason not to say it, not to do it. That surely is every reason to say it and every reason to do it. And I hope that we can promote what ought to be the axiom of the Labour movement, the idea of creating a peaceful world, a world of peace and justice. It doesn't mean shying away from the reasons the conflict takes place, but it does mean searching for peaceful solutions. Our book demonstrates that the arms trade is far too powerful in influencing policies. The damage of nuclear testing, the damage of other weapons testing is massive on people's lives. And we have to look to the industrial capability that is at the moment soaked up by defence expenditure being used to make more socially useful products. But it also means protecting the jobs of those that work in the defence industry whilst that conversion takes place. And so producing our book and discussing it around the country has been an absolutely fascinating experience. And we're looking to produce a further edition of the book in which we analyse the horrors of modern warfare. And I'll conclude with this point. I saw one of the Al Jazeera films last night about the use of computer technology and artificial intelligence in the war in Gaza. The way in which the profiles of almost the entirety of the population of Gaza have been stored electronically. What they do, what they eat, where they go, and who their friends are. And this has been used for targeting in the bombing campaigns that have been done. This is the dangers of electronic warfare, guided warfare by one side against a defenseless population on the other. That can't be right. It can't be something we'd want to be associated with. Therefore, we have to stand with the Palestinian people to gain recognition of them and their rights, but above all, to bring an end to this conflict and a real and permanent ceasefire.
Thank you, Jeremy. A lot to think about there, including some important reasons to back CND and all our other peace campaigns. Please do all get the copy of the book Jeremy mentioned. I was happy to be involved with organising the Latin America conference that a number of you were at on Saturday, and Jeremy was doing a book signing there, and I saw a lot of copies going like hotcakes. Monstrous anger of the guns. Get your copy now. Thanks to all of you who've joined us, and thanks in particular to our speakers, including Jeremy, to finish us off there. As you emphasised, let's all make sure as well to join together on the streets of Palestine this Saturday. And let's make sure that we stay on the streets for global justice and for Palestine. Finally, again, please do donate if you can and keep in touch with Arise, but also Strikemap and all our union lefts and campaigns mentioned today, including important upcoming online and in-person events. Thanks to all the volunteers, thanks to all the attendees, and let's stand together for peace and socialism. Thank you, everyone.